Hi, this is Fergus Walsh. I'm the BBC's medical correspondent. Welcome to this BBC Facebook live page. We're live on Facebook and I've got questions being sent to me all the time. And let's start with Carol asks, can I catch coronavirus by being in a lift with someone who has it? I live on the 17th floor. Well, Carol, yes, you can. In fact, you may be able to hear the sound of the BBC lift in the background. A lift is a fairly confined space, hard to stay 2 meters away from somebody else. If you're very concerned about it, what I would say is potentially, because 17 floors is a long way to walk up, that you go in the lift and then ask people would they mind getting the next lift. So you can get it. Also remember, when you touch lift buttons, when you get home, then you wash your hands, because you don't get infected by simply touching a hard surface. You then have to touch your face. So I hope that helps you. Vicky asks, what's happening to people arriving in the UK from abroad? Are they being forced to self-isolate? It's an excellent question. Well, it depends where they're arriving from. If they're coming from Italy, for example, there are still people coming back, and the Foreign Office has advised all Britons abroad to come home. Then if they're coming from hotspot areas, then they are being asked to isolate, but not from all countries. From France, for example, if you were coming from there, you would not be asked to self-isolate at home unless you feel that you have symptoms or that you've been in contact with people who are infected. But it's worth checking if you are coming back, or you know people who've just come back from overseas, that they check on the Foreign Office website, because there's advice there. Hannah asks, I'm due to give birth soon. Will my family be able to see my baby when he arrives? Well, that's an amazing question, and it's not one I've thought of. Congratulations on your impending arrival. I think that your family will be able to see your baby, but maybe to start with from a bit of a distance. It's really difficult, this. On a much sadder note, I was talking to a man earlier today whose mother died. She was at home with her husband, and they are now comforting their father, but from a distance. So they are going to go to the funeral, but they're going to have to keep a distance. I mean, the one thing you'd want to do in a situation like that is to hug your dad. But these are the very strange times we're living in. So Lisa asks, can I bring food shopping straight into the house? Can the virus stay on plastic and cardboard? Well, the answer is yes. The coronavirus can survive on surfaces. It survives for the longest period on hard surfaces like plastics, maybe for up to 72 hours. On softer surfaces, on paper and card, for example, more likely to be maybe a day, although the studies that are being done on this are still happening. In terms of bringing shopping in, what you need to do, bring it in from the supermarket and then wash your hands. It is this number one message that we have. If you wash your hands properly for 20 seconds, you will dramatically cut your chances of getting the infection. Next question is from Simon. I'm a gardener. Should I go to work? Well, Simon, if you're working in a garden and you can keep a safe 2 meter distance from other people, then yes, you can carry on going to work. That's the government advice. The government wants to try to keep the economy going, and clearly if you're a gardener, it's not a job where you can do that job from home. So as long as you can absolutely be certain that you can keep your distance from other people, then you can carry on. Steve asks, if someone has a mild case of coronavirus, will they develop the same antibodies as someone who has a more severe case? Yeah, that's a good question. Well, if your immune system has been in contact with the antigens, the bits of the virus that present themselves when you either breathe them in or you touch something and touch your face, then your immune system starts to build antibodies. And then so the next time you come into contact with that virus, maybe in a few weeks later, a few months later, you should have an immune response and your body should be able to produce antibodies to it. Now that should mean that you are immune to infection. We can't be absolutely certain because remember, we only first had the first recorded confirmed case of this on December the 31st, but it should mean that you have immunity to it, or if it is the case that you can then get reinfected, the likelihood is, based on other coronaviruses, that any subsequent infection should be milder. Of course, it may be that the virus itself mutates a certain amount, as viruses do, and it could become something that in a year's time you no longer have immunity to, but we're not there yet. Adam asks, can people who live in a town centre like me drive to a quieter place to take daily exercise? Well, we answered this in the programme tonight, and the answer is no, you're not supposed to, because that would be regarded as a non-essential journey. You can go out once a day for an hour's exercise, but you're not supposed to do any journey which is not completely essential. Roger asks, can my pets get coronavirus? And if so, how do I protect them? Well, there was a dog, I'm not quite sure where it was. It might have been in South Korea or Japan, who was reported to have contracted coronavirus. I don't think the dog fell ill. And the really important thing for your pets is, as far as we know, they can't get ill from coronavirus. And for humans, as far as we know, your pets can't give you coronavirus. I think hopefully that answers it. But again, emerging evidence here, we're still in the early days. Carl asks, can we visit family if we stand at their window? Yep, Carl, I think that's a reasonable way of going at it. And if you think about the nearly 2 million people with the highest level of risk who've been told to utterly shield themselves and not leave their home at all for 12 weeks, not even to go and do shopping. Well, if one of those is your relative, then it is okay to walk up their front drive and then for them to open their door and for you to stay at least 2 meters away. Let's say, for example, you're doing their shopping for them, then you can do that, but you mustn't get any closer than 2 meters. And if you were in any way unwell, you shouldn't go at all. Andy asks, how useful are antibacterial wipes? Well, they're better than nothing, but in terms of the number one thing that you can do to prevent your risk of infection is to wash your hands. I know we keep giving this, and it seems like soap and water. It seems, it seems so basic, but it is actually the easiest and the most effective way to dramatically cut your chances of getting infected, so that even if you go around then and touch something that has the virus on it, if you then go and effectively wash your hands, and there's plenty of guides online to how to wash your hands effectively, you can protect yourself. You can also use those alcohol gels to sanitizers, as long as they've got at least 60% alcohol in them, if you don't have soap and water handy. Tim asks, would diluting hand sanitizer with water make it last longer, significantly reduce its effectiveness? Yes, I think it would, because I think it needs to be at least 60% alcohol. The best thing is, if you don't have any hand sanitizer, and who does these days, because it's very hard to get hold of, just make sure you regularly wash your hands. Beverly asks, what happens when the building you live in has communal facilities? How can you stay safe? It's a very good question. What you need to do now, let's say, for example, you're living in a hall of residence where, for example, one person may be isolating with suspected coronavirus. What you'd need to do there is think about setting up a rota so that person use the facilities last, say use the bathroom last, don't share toiletries, don't share towels, and they would need to then wash down everything afterwards. And same with a kitchen, to use the facilities separately, maybe have separate chopping boards, don't use the same cutlery or the same crockery if you're living with somebody who potentially has the infection. Emily asks, my child naps in the car. Will it be okay to take her for a spin to get her off to sleep? Well, I used to do this with my kids when they're young. I used to drive them round at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to get them off to sleep. But no, I think you're going to have to find another way of doing this, because this will be regarded as a essential journey, and we've got to try and cut out all non-essential journeys. I know it's hard. It's the new normal. It seems very strange indeed, but all non-essential journeys, if you can, and don't use your car or public transport unless you really need to, if you're a key worker, for example. Tony asks, why do some countries have such low death rates? What are they doing differently? Well, I think possibly, Tony, you might be referring there to Germany. Germany seems to have a lower death rate per head of population than, say, the UK or Italy or France or Spain. Now, all the experts in Germany are scratching their collective heads on this one. They're not entirely sure. It's true that Germany may be slightly earlier in the stage of its epidemic than elsewhere, which might be giving a false impression. It's also true, I heard, that a lot of the early people who were infected with coronavirus in Germany were skiers who'd been infected when they'd been skiing, and these were generally young, fit, healthy people, and they spread it to other young, fit, healthy people. The other possibility is that they've done more testing. They've done a lot of testing, second or third only to Korea and a couple of other countries, and so it may well be that they've just tested more people, and so that skewed their figures. We won't really know for sure about Germany for a few weeks yet. Yasmin asks, my son has severe eczema and asthma. Can I take him out for a walk or shopping? Well, the advice on shopping is that if you can do your shopping, you should do your shopping on your own rather than in groups. But yes, you can take him out for a walk. People are allowed, and it's important that they get exercise. The key thing is that you don't interact. He doesn't then go and play with his friends when he's out. That people who are in households, if you share a household with somebody, you can go out for exercise with them, but then you don't mix up with other people. You don't mix with other members of your family if they don't live at home with you. Danielle, I'm going to keep going here because these questions keep coming in, so keep sending them. Danielle asks, are cleaners still having to clean places like schools? That's a good question, Danielle. Well, we remember that a lot of schools are still open. So, yes, they need to be cleaned. Particular emphasis on door handles because that's where the virus can be there. Almost more important than cleaning the floors at the moment is cleaning the things that we tend to touch. So, yes, cleaners are still going to schools. Lee asks, is the virus airborne? Yes, Lee, the virus is airborne. It's a respiratory illness, and it tends to be transmitted in droplets. So when somebody coughs, they tend to cough, and the virus can travel up to 2 meters. That's why we have this 2-meter rule on staying away from people. They can also cough and leave it on surfaces. But it also, if you're very, very close to someone, if you live with someone and you're right up very close to them, they can literally breathe the virus into your lungs. But you have to really be very close by them. So the 2-meter guidance there should keep you safe. And remember, if you are out and you touch surfaces, do not touch your face, and that will dramatically cut your chances of getting infected. Emma asks, can neighbouring children play tennis over the hedge if they're not near each other but would be touching the same ball? Well, I can see that a lot of people are being creative here about how to keep their children occupied at home. Well, the advice there would be no, keep the ball on your side, because that was the advice last week, that you could have a kickabout in the park. But really, I'm afraid if one child is infected, they throw the ball over. You know what kids are like. They're going to keep touching their face. Probably not. But maybe they could think up another game that doesn't involve throwing a ball over. And it's really hard, this stuff. Barry asks, can you still contract COVID-19 if you're already unwell with a cold or flu? Yes, Barry, you definitely can. And in fact, if you have flu or you have a bacterial infection, then that could put you at risk of actually a worse infection with COVID-19, because if your immune system is already fighting off another pathogen, a bacterium or a virus, then it could mean you're at higher risk of worse complications. And in fact, with COVID-19, what we've found is that people who get that infection and then after 5 days aren't able to fight it off often have a secondary infection, often a bacterial infection that requires antibiotics. So that's one of the reasons why people can end up quite seriously ill. Although I should stress that the vast majority of people who get COVID-19 will have a mild illness, and it's a minority who will need hospital treatment. And even if you are frail, and even if you are old or you have underlying symptoms, the vast majority of people will get through this. So I don't want to send a message of despair here to you. We have to watch out for this virus because it can be particularly nasty, but most of us are going to get through this, the vast majority of us, in fact. Nikki asks, if I'm self-isolating because a member of my family has symptoms, but I have none, am I still allowed out to walk the dog? Yes, the dog can be walked. You are allowed to walk the dog. Actually, if you have symptoms, you are allowed to walk your dog, but you just have to make absolutely certain you do not come into contact with anybody else. In fact, that's the advice for everyone. But yes, if you're self-isolating there, and in fact the rule there is, I can give you a scenario. If there were a family of 4, let's say mum, dad, and 2 teenage children, a boy and a girl, if mum gets ill with symptoms, then the whole family have to stay at home for 14 days. But let's say the mum then, who was the first person to fall ill, let's say she feels better after 7 days, completely well again, she'll be allowed to go back to work because she will no longer be infectious. Well, let's say after day 3, her daughter gets ill and she gets what we think is COVID-19. She then feels completely well after 7 days, so that takes us to day 10. She would then be allowed to go out, but the husband and her brother, they would have to stay the full 14 days. So that's the advice on family household isolation. Caroline asked, do I have to get my car's MOT done if I'm self-isolating? Well, you can't if you're self-isolating, but there's some new rules on MOTs where, in fact, you can get a grace period now, an extension, especially if you're self-isolating. Sarah asked, what do the restrictions in the UK mean for separated parents sharing care of children? Well, there was a little bit of a mix-up there yesterday where Michael Gove initially said in an interview on Good Morning Britain that children would not be able to go to the other parent's house where families were separated, but he very quickly put that right and said during this 3-week period that it was very important that children of separated parents were able to go from one household to another. So yes, they can. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up there. Thank you very, very much for watching this BBC Facebook Live. Good night to you all.